The morning they padlocked my wife's wheelchair to our front porch railing was the day I decided to unleash the full power of the state attorney general's office against our corrupt homeowners association. For months, we'd endured their relentless harassment over our unauthorized wheelchair ramp and other so-called violations. But the sight of Sarah sitting helpless in the morning sun, tears streaming down her face as she struggled against the thick metal chain, broke something fundamental inside me. How could these neighborhood tyrants possibly know that before my wife's disability forced her early retirement, she had personally drafted the very accessibility laws they were now flagrantly violating? More importantly, what would happen when the governor herself, my direct superior and Sarah's former law school roommate, learned exactly how they'd treated her dear friend? Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. The day we first viewed the single-story craftsman in Willow Creek Estates remains vivid in my memory. After months of searching for an accessible home that wouldn't require extensive modifications, the listing seemed almost too perfect to believe. I remember how Sarah's eyes lit up as she navigated her motorized wheelchair through the wide doorways and open floor plan without a single obstacle. The previous owner had meticulously incorporated subtle accessibility features throughout: lever door handles instead of knobs, roll-under sinks in the bathrooms, reinforced walls for grab bars, and light switches positioned at wheelchair height. "Michael, this is it," Sarah had whispered, reaching for my hand as she gazed around the spacious living room. Her smile, the genuine, radiant one I'd seen less frequently since her multiple sclerosis diagnosis 5 years earlier, made my heart swell. I could actually live here without feeling like my wheelchair is constantly in the way. After 15 years working as a practicing attorney specializing in housing accessibility law, I'd finally accepted the position of chief legal counsel to Governor Alina Matthews, a career move that allowed me more flexibility to care for Sarah when her symptoms flared up. The governor had been understanding beyond measure, particularly since she and Sarah had remained close friends since their law school days at Harvard. "The commute to the Capitol is just 30 minutes, I noted, already envisioning our new life. "And there's a perfect space for your home office in the sunroom overlooking the garden." Sarah wheeled herself around the house with increasing excitement, pointing out features that most able-bodied people would never notice: the absence of thresholds between rooms, the hardwood floors that would be easier to navigate than carpet, the open shower with a built-in bench. The only modification we would need to add was an exterior ramp to navigate the 2 shallow steps leading to our front door. As I unpacked my legal books in the home office during our first week in the house, I occasionally glanced at the framed photographs lining my desk: Sarah and me at Harvard Law graduation, Sarah receiving her Accessibility Advocacy Award from the State Bar Association, and my personal favorite, Sarah, Governor Matthews, and me at the signing of the Residential Accessibility Protection Act 3 years earlier. My significant contribution to drafting that legislation had earned me my current position, though few of our new neighbors knew exactly what I did for a living. I preferred keeping that information private, wanting our home to be a sanctuary from political conversations and networking attempts. Our first month in Willow Creek Estates passed peacefully. I split my time between the governor's office downtown and working remotely from our home office. Sarah taught online classes for the state university's law program and tended to the raised garden beds I'd built along our side yard, specially designed at the perfect height for her to garden from her wheelchair. Our next-door neighbors, the Garcias, welcomed us with homemade tamales and genuine warmth. Their 10-year-old daughter, Lucia, quickly became fascinated with Sarah's electric wheelchair, asking thoughtful questions about accessibility that reflected her parents' good-hearted openness. Across the street, elderly Mrs. Chen often waved from her porch swing, occasionally crossing over to share cuttings from her prized orchid collection. "For your sunroom," she'd explained in her soft voice. "Everyone deserves beauty in their home." What I didn't notice during those blissful first weeks were the curtains that occasionally twitched in the large colonial-style house at the end of our cul-de-sac, or how certain people's smiles tightened when they saw Sarah's wheelchair. I was too caught up in our newfound happiness to recognize the warning signs of trouble brewing beneath the neighborhood's pristine surface. The sharp rap on our door came at precisely 7:30 on a Saturday morning in early April. 3 authoritative knocks in rapid succession that echoed through our quiet home. Sarah was still sleeping. Her medication often made mornings difficult, so I hurried to answer before a second round of knocking disturbed her rest. A woman stood on our porch, clipboard clutched in one manicured hand, a yellow measuring tape dangling from the pocket of her cream-colored designer blazer. Her blonde hair was swept into an immaculate chignon, not a strand out of place despite the early hour. Diamond studs glinted from her earlobes, matching the tennis bracelet on her wrist. Behind her, a silver Mercedes-Benz GLE gleamed in our driveway, partially blocking access to our mailbox. "Good morning," she announced with a practiced smile that didn't reach her ice-blue eyes. "I'm Barbara Winters, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association." She extended her hand, nails perfectly polished in a neutral shade. "And you are?" "Michael Donovan," I replied without taking her offered hand. "Is there a particular reason you're knocking on our door before 8 a.m. on a weekend?" Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly as she withdrew her unshaken hand. "Just welcoming new residents and addressing some concerns that have been brought to the board's attention." Her gaze drifted pointedly to the wooden ramp we'd installed alongside our front steps. "I notice you've made unauthorized exterior modifications to your property." "The ramp is for my wife," I explained, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the presumptuous nature of her visit. "She uses a wheelchair." Barbara made a small notation on her clipboard, the scratch of her pen against paper somehow grating. "Yes, well, all exterior modifications require pre-approval from the Architectural Committee. Section 4, Paragraph 12 of the HOA covenant clearly states that any changes to the original structure, including accessibility features, must undergo review to ensure neighborhood aesthetic continuity." "We weren't provided with any HOA information during our purchase," I interrupted, feeling the first stirrings of annoyance. "Our realtor and the title company assured us this neighborhood doesn't have an active HOA. There was nothing in our closing documents about association rules or fees." Barbara's penciled eyebrows rose slightly, creating perfectly symmetrical arches of surprise, or perhaps disdain. "I assure you, Mr. Donovan, the Willow Creek Homeowners Association is very much active. We meet monthly, collect annual dues of $950, and maintain strict control over the aesthetic integrity of our community." She extended a thick manila folder toward me, its edges crisp and aligned with military precision. "Here's our welcome packet, including violation citation forms and a copy of our covenants. You'll need to submit a retroactive application for that ramp and pay the $250 processing fee by Friday." I didn't take the folder, instead crossing my arms over my chest. "I'll need to see the HOA's registration documents first. State law requires proper filing with the county recorder's office and regular renewals for any homeowners association to be legally enforceable." Something flickered in Barbara's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or irritation that I knew the law. She recovered quickly, her expression smoothing back into practiced pleasantness. "Everything is properly filed, Mr. Donovan. We've operated for 15 years without incident." "Then you'll have no problem providing me with the documentation," I replied pleasantly. "In the meantime, I should inform you that state law exempts disability accommodations from HOA architectural restrictions. The Residential Accessibility Protection Act, Section 5, specifically protects homeowners' rights to install wheelchair ramps without prior approval." Barbara's smile vanished completely, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You seem unusually familiar with property law for someone who just moved in." Before I could respond, I heard the soft whir of Sarah's wheelchair behind me. "Michael, who's at the door so early?" I stepped aside, allowing Sarah to join me in the doorway. Her long chestnut hair was loosely braided over one shoulder, and she wore the faded University of Washington Law School t-shirt she often slept in. Despite the early hour and being caught off guard by an unexpected visitor, my wife's natural dignity was evident in her straight posture and direct gaze. Barbara's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Sarah's wheelchair, a sleek modern model that Sarah had customized with a small Harvard Law decal on the backrest. "Oh, I see." Her gaze flickered down to the wheels, then back up to Sarah's face. "Well, Mrs. Donovan, I'm Barbara Winters, HOA president. I was just explaining to your husband that all exterior modifications, even for special circumstances, require approval." "It's Dr. Donovan, actually," Sarah corrected gently. "I have a PhD in constitutional law with a specialization in housing regulations, and this ramp is a necessary accommodation for my disability, protected under both state and federal law." Barbara's lips pressed into an even thinner line, the corners of her mouth turning downward. Nevertheless, our community has standards. That ramp is not consistent with the architectural aesthetic we maintain in Willow Creek. The wood stain doesn't match approved colors, and the design lacks the decorative elements required for front-facing structures. Sarah's right eyebrow raised slightly, a warning sign I recognized from 15 years of marriage. She was about to eviscerate this woman with the precision of a skilled litigator who had argued before the state Supreme Court. "Ms. Winters," Sarah began, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of authority she'd developed during years of courtroom battles. "Perhaps you're unfamiliar with the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act, both of which prohibit discrimination against disabled individuals through restrictive housing policies. Or perhaps the state's Residential Accessibility Protection Act hasn't crossed your desk yet." Barbara shifted uncomfortably, her weight transferring from one designer heel to the other. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "That particular legislation explicitly prevents homeowners associations from requiring approval for accessibility modifications, rendering any such restriction null and void. The law specifically states that aesthetic considerations cannot be used to delay or deny reasonable accommodations. Now, unless you'd like to explain to the State Housing Commission why you're harassing disabled homeowners at 7:30 on a Saturday morning, I suggest we postpone this conversation until a more reasonable hour." Barbara's face flushed, two spots of color appearing high on her cheekbones. For a moment she seemed ready to argue, but instead she straightened her cream blazer with a sharp tug. "I'll have our attorney review those provisions you mentioned. In the meantime, you should still attend Tuesday's HOA meeting, 7 p.m. at the Community Center on Maple Drive." She thrust the folder toward me again. "And do review these materials. Ignorance of our regulations won't be considered an excuse for continued violations." I took the folder this time, if only to end the conversation. Barbara turned sharply and marched back to her Mercedes, her heels clicking against our walkway with military precision. As she slid into the driver's seat, I noticed her taking a photo of our house with her phone before driving away. As we watched her car disappear down the street, Sarah sighed deeply. Why do I get the feeling she's not going to make our lives easy? I closed the door and placed the folder on our entryway table. Don't worry, she's just flexing her authority. Once she realizes we know our rights and won't be intimidated, she'll back off and find an easier target. Sarah wheeled toward the kitchen, shaking her head. I've encountered people like her before, Michael. They don't back off, they escalate. Little did I know how catastrophically right my wife would prove to be. By Wednesday afternoon, 3 HOA violation notices had appeared on our door, each printed on bright yellow paper and sealed in clear plastic sleeves to protect them from the light spring rain. The first cited our unapproved ramp, describing it as an unsightly structural addition that diminishes neighborhood aesthetic value. The second claimed our mailbox didn't match the approved neighborhood design, though it was identical to the one installed when the house was built. The third was for excessive vegetation visible from the street, apparently referring to Sarah's raised garden beds, where she had just planted early spring herbs and flowers. Each notice included a fine, $150 for the ramp, $75 for the mailbox, and $100 for the garden beds. The total, $325, was due within 7 days, with daily penalties of $25 per violation accruing thereafter. This is ridiculous, Sarah said, examining the notices spread across our kitchen table. Our mailbox is exactly the same as the Garcias next door, and Mrs. Chen across the street has raised beds twice the size of mine. I frowned, noticing the signature at the bottom of each notice. Barbara Winters, HOA president. I think we're being singled out. Let me call some of the neighbors, see if they've received similar notices. An hour of phone calls confirmed our suspicion. Neither the Garcias nor Mrs. Chen had received any violations for their identical mailboxes or garden beds. In fact, Mr. Garcia laughed when I described our citations. That's Barbara for you, he said, his voice lowering as if she might somehow overhear our conversation. She picks her targets carefully. Last year it was the Patels at number 47. Their son uses a wheelchair too. They lasted 3 months before they sold. I spent that evening researching the Willow Creek Estates HOA. According to county records, a homeowners association had indeed been registered 15 years earlier when the development was first built. But its charter had expired 5 years ago when the necessary renewal paperwork wasn't filed. Technically, the HOA existed in name only, with no legal authority to enforce rules or collect fees. More concerning was what I discovered about Barbara Winters. She'd only purchased her home in Willow Creek 3 years ago, but had quickly positioned herself as HOA president shortly after moving in. Under her leadership, violation notices had increased by 400%, according to complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau. At the office the next day, I mentioned our HOA troubles to my deputy counsel, Marcus Johnson, as we prepared for our morning briefing with the governor. "Willow Creek," he asked, looking up from his computer. "You might want to talk to Consumer Protection. They've received multiple complaints about that neighborhood." "You're familiar with it?" I asked, surprised. Marcus nodded grimly. "My aunt lived there until last year. Same story, harassment, selective enforcement, mysterious water shutoffs until she finally gave up and sold her house at a loss. The buyer was some corporate entity that flipped it within months." By lunchtime, I had a confidential file from the Consumer Protection Division delivered to my office. 15 formal complaints had been filed against the Willow Creek HOA in the past 2 years, all alleging selective enforcement of rules, excessive fines, and harassment. 5 complaints specifically named Barbara Winters. Even more disturbing, 3 homeowners claimed they were forced to sell their homes after mounting HOA fines led to financial distress. "This is a pattern," I told Sarah that evening, spreading the documents across our dining room table. "She targets certain homeowners, hammers them with violations until they can't pay, then watches as they're forced to sell." Sarah examined a spreadsheet I'd created tracking property sales in the neighborhood. "And look at this. In the past 2 years, 8 homes have been purchased by Winter Properties, LLC. She looked up at me, her expression troubled. "Is that?" "Barbara's husband's company," I confirmed, pointing to the business registration documents I'd found. "They're systematically forcing people out, then buying the properties at below-market rates." Sarah's eyes hardened. "We need to file a formal complaint with the Attorney General's office." I smiled grimly. Normally, I'd recuse myself from a case involving my own property, but I think an initial inquiry is warranted. This goes beyond our situation. It's predatory behavior targeting multiple vulnerable homeowners. The next morning, I asked my investigative team to quietly look into Barbara Winters and the Willow Creek HOA. By that afternoon, we had discovered a disturbing pattern. Barbara particularly targeted elderly residents, disabled homeowners, and families who might lack the resources to fight back. Her husband's company had acquired properties at an average of 22% below market value, renovated them cosmetically, and resold them at premium prices to buyers who were promised a well-regulated community with strong property protections. That evening, Sarah and I drafted a formal response to the HOA violation notices, citing the expired charter, state disability protection laws, and requesting all communication be in writing moving forward. I hand-delivered it to Barbara's mailbox on my way to work the next morning, placing it inside a legal-sized envelope marked personal and confidential. Her response came swiftly and unexpectedly. At 3:12 p.m., my assistant interrupted a meeting with the governor and the Infrastructure Planning Committee. "Mr. Donovan, I apologize for the interruption, but your wife is on line 1. She says it's urgent." Governor Matthews nodded immediately. "Take it, Michael. We can continue this discussion after." I excused myself and picked up the phone in the adjacent office. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Her voice trembled with a mixture of anger and distress. "Michael, they towed our car from our own driveway. They're saying we violated some 48-hour street parking rule, but our car wasn't even on the street. I need my van to get to my doctor's appointment tomorrow." "What? That's absurd. Who authorized this?" "Barbara and some man in an HOA polo shirt. They're still outside, taking pictures of our property. Michael, they're saying we owe $375 for the towing plus our outstanding violations." "I'm on my way home. Don't engage with them further." I arrived home 30 minutes later to find Sarah in our driveway, her wheelchair positioned defiantly beside a man in a blue polo shirt embroidered with Willow Creek HOA enforcement. Behind him stood Barbara Winters, arms crossed over her chest, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "What's going on here?" I demanded, joining my wife and placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Your vehicle was in violation of HOA parking regulations. the man explained without making eye contact. Section 7, Paragraph 3 states that no vehicle may be parked in a residential driveway for more than 48 consecutive hours without movement. That's absurd, I said, struggling to maintain my professional composure. We can park in our own driveway indefinitely. There's no legal basis for restricting parking on private property. Barbara stepped forward, her heels sinking slightly into our lawn. Actually, Mr. Donovan, the rule exists to prevent unsightly vehicle storage. We take pride in our community's appearance. She smiled thinly. The towing fee is $275 plus a $100 HOA processing fee. Of course, this is in addition to your outstanding violations, which now total. She consulted her clipboard with theatrical precision. $625 with accumulated late fees. I felt my professional composure slipping. This harassment stops now. You have no legal authority here. Your HOA charter expired 5 years ago. Barbara's smile never wavered. Our attorney assures us our standing is perfectly valid. Perhaps you should consult with a lawyer yourself. Her gaze drifted to Sarah. Though I understand legal fees can be quite burdensome for families dealing with medical issues. The implication was clear. She thought we were financially vulnerable due to Sarah's condition. The irony might have been amusing if it weren't so offensive. Sarah wheeled closer to Barbara, her voice dangerously quiet. Ms. Winters, I strongly suggest you research exactly who you're dealing with before this goes any further. Barbara laughed lightly. Is that a threat, Dr. Donovan? Because threatening an HOA officer is grounds for additional fines. Section 12, Paragraph 5. It's not a threat, Sarah replied. It's legal advice, and it's free, which is more than I can say for what's coming next. As Barbara and her enforcer left, I helped Sarah back up our ramp and into the house. Her hands were shaking with a combination of stress and the physical toll of her confrontation. I can't believe they took my accessibility van, she said, her voice catching. They know I need it for medical appointments. I called the towing company immediately, identifying myself as chief legal counsel to the governor. Our van was returned within the hour, the fees mysteriously waived. The manager himself delivered it, apologizing profusely. We were told it was an abandoned vehicle, he explained nervously. We'd never have touched it if we'd known it was a disability transport. That evening, as I helped Sarah into bed, she looked troubled. Michael, we could end this with one phone call. One email from your office would shut her down. I sat beside her on the bed, taking her hands in mine. I know, but think about Mrs. Chen across the street, who's being charged $50 a day because her grandson sometimes stays overnight. Or the Garcias, who received a violation for their daughter's birthday decorations last month. Or anyone else Barbara is targeting. If we use my position to solve just our problem, what happens to them? Sarah nodded slowly. You're right, we need to stop the whole operation, not just protect ourselves. She squeezed my hand. But I'm worried about what she'll do next. Her concern proved prophetic. The following morning, we discovered our water had been shut off. I don't understand, I said to the water department representative on the phone, trying to keep frustration from seeping into my voice. We've paid our bill. Why is our service disconnected? We received a request from your HOA stating unauthorized plumbing modifications posed a risk to the neighborhood water supply, the representative explained with the detached tone of someone reading from a script. They provided documentation of their authority to request emergency shutoffs. That documentation is fraudulent, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. The HOA has no such authority. I need this service restored immediately. I'm sorry, sir, but we need written confirmation from the HOA before we can restore service. It's our policy when safety concerns are raised. After 3 hours of calls, escalating through increasingly higher levels of management, I finally reached the Utility Commission's director, who agreed to send an inspector immediately. Meanwhile, Sarah needed her daily medication, which required water, and the temperature outside was climbing toward 85 degrees. We should go to a hotel, I suggested, but Sarah shook her head firmly. If we leave, they win. That's what they want, to make this house unlivable for us, to force us out like they've done to others. By late afternoon, the water inspector had determined there were no plumbing issues whatsoever and restored our service with an apology. But the message was clear. Barbara Winters had connections throughout the local government and wasn't afraid to use them to make our lives miserable. That night, our front yard sprinklers activated at 2 a.m., despite being turned off at the control panel. They ran for hours, flooding our wheelchair ramp and creating a muddy mess that made it nearly impossible for Sarah to leave the house the next morning. "This is deliberate," Sarah said, staring at the soggy path from our doorway. "She's trying to trap me here." I took the day off work to install security cameras around our property. By evening, we had comprehensive coverage of every approach to our house, with footage backed up to cloud storage that couldn't be tampered with. "Do you think this will deter her?" Sarah asked as we reviewed the camera feeds on our laptop. "No," I admitted, "but it will give us evidence." I didn't have to wait long for that evidence to materialize. At 11:17 p.m., the cameras caught Barbara and two men approaching our front yard. They carried garden shears and what looked like a small saw. Moving with purpose, they began cutting through the wooden supports of Sarah's wheelchair ramp. I burst through the front door, triggering the motion-activated floodlights. "Stop right there. This is private property." Barbara froze momentarily, then recovered quickly. "HOA emergency inspection. This ramp is structurally unsound and poses a safety hazard to the community." "You're vandalizing our property on camera," I said, pointing to the visible security devices. "Leave now or I'm calling the police." Barbara smirked, her confidence unshaken. "Go ahead. My brother-in-law is Lieutenant Collins. I wonder who'll respond to your call." As if to prove her point, a police cruiser rolled slowly past our house at that exact moment, the officer inside nodding to Barbara before continuing down the street without stopping. "You have until tomorrow to remove this eyesore," Barbara said, gesturing to the partially damaged ramp. "Or we'll remove it for you along with those unauthorized cameras." After they left, I surveyed the damage under the harsh floodlights. The ramp was still functional but significantly weakened. It would need repairs before Sarah could safely use it. "That's it," Sarah said when I returned inside, her voice shaking with anger. "This isn't just about us anymore. She's abusing her perceived authority to terrorize people. It's time to end this." I nodded grimly. "Tomorrow." The next morning, I walked into my office at the state capitol building with purpose. "Marcus, cancel my appointments. We have an emergency situation." Over the next 4 hours, my team compiled a comprehensive case against Barbara Winters and the fraudulent Willow Creek HOA. We obtained sworn statements from 8 current and former residents describing harassment, selective enforcement, and predatory practices. We documented the expired HOA charter and the pattern of property acquisition by Winter Properties, LLC. Our forensic accountants traced financial connections between the local police department's equipment fund and donations from Barbara's husband's company. At 2 p.m., I presented our findings to Governor Matthews in a closed-door meeting, laying out the evidence methodically. "This is disturbing, Michael," she said, reviewing the documentation with a frown. "But I'm concerned about your direct involvement. Given that this affects your personal residence, there could be an appearance of using your office for private benefit." "I understand, Governor. That's why I've structured this as a broader consumer protection case targeting fraudulent HOA practices statewide. Willow Creek is just one example among 17 we've identified. This pattern of corruption and harassment extends beyond our neighborhood." The governor nodded slowly, still reviewing the evidence. "And you have evidence of law enforcement collusion." I played the video showing the police cruiser deliberately passing during the vandalism incident. "Lieutenant Collins appears to be providing protection for these activities. We've also documented irregular approval processes for homes purchased by Winter Properties, suggesting possible corruption in the county permitting office." Governor Matthews stood up from her desk, her decision made. "Initiate a full investigation through consumer protection, coordinate with state police to avoid local interference. And Michael," she paused, her expression softening slightly, "how is Sarah handling all this?" "She's furious," I admitted, "but mostly because she knows we have the resources to fight back while many of their victims don't." "She always did have a strong sense of justice," the governor smiled, a memory passing between us. "We didn't survive law school by backing down from bullies." She glanced at the photo on my desk, her, Sarah, and me at the legislation signing. "Tell her I'm coming for dinner soon, once this is resolved." As I left the governor's office, I received a text from our neighbor, Mr. Garcia. HOA towing truck at your house right now. Sarah is arguing with them. I broke every speed limit driving home. I arrived to find Sarah's wheelchair positioned at the bottom of our damaged ramp, blocking a tow truck from accessing our driveway. Barbara Winters stood nearby with two men in HOA polo shirts and the tow truck driver, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "You have no right to remove a medically necessary vehicle," Sarah was saying as I jumped out of my car. "That adaptive van is protected under the ADA and state law. It cannot be towed without court authorization." Barbara noticed me approaching and smoothed her expression. "Ah, Mr. Donovan, perhaps you can convince your wife to move her wheelchair. She's preventing legitimate HOA business." "The only legitimate business happening here is about to be your arrest," I said, loudly enough for neighbors who had gathered to hear. "Sarah, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied, not moving her wheelchair. "Just educating Ms. Winters about federal disability law, again." Barbara laughed, the sound brittle and forced. "Always hiding behind your disability. Pathetic. This neighborhood was pristine before people like you started moving in." "People like me?" Sarah's voice was dangerously calm. "You know what I mean," Barbara sneered. "People who can't maintain their properties properly. People who need special accommodations and expect everyone else to bear the burden. People who bring down property values with unsightly medical equipment." I stepped forward, fury rising in my chest, but Sarah held up her hand. This was her moment. "You know what I find pathetic, Barbara? People who create fraudulent organizations to terrorize their neighbors. People who target the elderly and disabled because they think we're easy prey." Sarah's voice carried clearly in the afternoon air. "People who are so desperate for control they're willing to break the law to exercise power over others." Barbara's face flushed an angry red. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. My husband owns Winter Properties, LLC, Sarah finished for her. "The company that mysteriously acquires homes after the owners have been harassed into selling at below-market rates. A company currently under investigation for real estate fraud. We know exactly what you're doing." For the first time, uncertainty flashed across Barbara's face. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, we can," I said, stepping forward. "Barbara Winters, my name is Michael Donovan. I serve as Chief Legal Counsel to Governor Alina Matthews. For the past month, you've been harassing the wrong people." Barbara's eyes widened, her composure cracking. "You're lying." "He's not," said a new voice. We all turned to see a black SUV pulling up to the curb. Governor Alina Matthews herself stepped out, flanked by two state police officers. A second vehicle disgorged four more officers, who took up positions around the perimeter of our property. "Sarah," the governor called, walking over to embrace my wife. "I'm so sorry about all this. When Michael showed me the footage, I had to come personally." Barbara's face had gone white, her usually perfect posture sagging slightly. "Governor Matthews, I don't understand." "Let me clarify," the governor said, turning to face Barbara with the same steely expression I'd seen her use when confronting corrupt officials. "Sarah Donovan was my roommate in law school. Before her MS diagnosis, she was the state's leading expert on housing discrimination. In fact, she helped draft the very laws you've been violating. Her husband, Michael, serves as my chief legal counsel and runs the Consumer Protection Division." One of the state police officers stepped forward. "Barbara Winters, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, housing discrimination, and criminal conspiracy." "This is absurd," Barbara stammered as the officer began reading her rights. "My brother-in-law." "Lieutenant Collins has been relieved of duty pending an investigation," the officer continued, "along with three other officers believed to be involved in your scheme." As Barbara was led to the police car, her face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this. Do you know who my husband's golf partners are?" The governor smiled coolly. "Actually, I do. The Attorney General plays in that same group. He's looking forward to discussing your case with Mr. Winters personally." After the police cars pulled away, our neighbors erupted in spontaneous applause. Mrs. Chen hobbled over to hug Sarah, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. The Garcias brought out bottles of champagne from their house. Others I barely recognized came to shake our hands, many sharing their own stories of harassment at Barbara's hands. As the impromptu block party continued into the evening, Sarah and the governor sat on our porch. reminiscing about their law school days while I fielded calls from the media, which had caught wind of the high-profile arrest. "You could have ended this on day one," the governor said to me during a quiet moment, sipping champagne from a plastic cup. "Why didn't you?" I glanced at Sarah, who smiled knowingly. "It was never just about us," I explained. "If we'd shut her down immediately using your office, the system that allowed this to happen would have continued. The other victims might never have seen justice." Plus, Sarah added with a smile that reminded me of the fiery law student I'd fallen in love with, "there's a certain satisfaction in letting someone dig their own grave, especially when they think you're helpless." As darkness fell and neighbors returned to their homes, promising to attend the community meeting scheduled for the following week, Sarah wheeled over to what remained of our damaged ramp. "You know what's ironic?" she said quietly. "All they had to do was leave us alone, and they never would have faced consequences for what they've been doing to others." I knelt beside her wheelchair, taking her hand in mine. Sometimes the people who seem most vulnerable are the most dangerous to cross. 1 month later, Sarah and I hosted the first meeting of the legitimate Willow Creek Community Association. Not an HOA with coercive powers, but a voluntary neighborhood group focused on mutual support and true community building. The investigation into Barbara Winters and her husband had revealed a pattern of fraud extending to 6 other neighborhoods across the state. 17 homes had been illegally acquired through their harassment scheme, with particular targeting of elderly and disabled homeowners. The state's Consumer Protection Division, working with my office, had created a restitution program for affected families. Lieutenant Collins and 2 other officers had been charged with corruption and abuse of power. Barbara's husband faced federal wire fraud charges, and Barbara herself had accepted a plea deal requiring her to testify against her co-conspirators in exchange for a reduced sentence. As our neighbors mingled in our backyard, sharing stories and building genuine connections over food and drinks, Sarah approached with Governor Matthews beside her. "It's official," Sarah announced, holding up a document. "The governor just signed the Neighborhood Protection Act. It requires all HOAs to register annually, prohibits discrimination against disabled and elderly residents, and creates a state oversight board with real enforcement power." And the governor added with a warm smile, "It establishes the position of Special Counsel for Housing Rights, a role I'm hoping Sarah will consider taking." Sarah looked surprised. "Me, but my health is exactly why you're perfect for this," the governor said. "Who better to protect vulnerable homeowners than someone who understands firsthand? And it's a position you can work largely from home with staff support." That evening, after the celebration ended and our guests had departed, Sarah and I sat on our newly rebuilt wheelchair ramp, watching fireflies dance in our front yard. The sturdy, wide ramp, now properly reinforced and beautifully designed to complement our home's architecture, represented everything we'd fought for. "When Barbara chained my wheelchair to that porch," Sarah said softly, "she thought she was dealing with an easy target. She never imagined she was actually providing the final piece of evidence needed to bring down her entire operation." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "The irony is, if she'd just left us alone, we might never have uncovered what she was doing to others." Sarah smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "Some people see a wheelchair and think vulnerable. They should really see it and think beware." As I looked out at our peaceful neighborhood, now truly ours, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly Barbara's empire had crumbled once she targeted the wrong family. She'd seen a wheelchair ramp and assumed weakness. She never imagined that the quiet couple with the accessibility modifications would be the architects of not just her downfall, but of a new law protecting thousands of homeowners across the state. Sometimes, I thought, the most dangerous people are the ones you underestimate, especially when they have both justice and the governor on their side.